Every moral society is built upon a lie, not an accidental deception, but an exquisite architecture of falsehood, designed to protect the fragile from truth. The more a civilization praises virtue, the more it hides its cowardice behind the curtain of moral words. Man has always needed an excuse for his weakness. He calls it ethics. He calls it faith. He calls it doing what's right. But beneath every halo, the same shadow pulses fear. Morality is not the language of the strong. It is the last refuge of those who are too afraid to live according to their own instincts. The strong act, the weak explain. The strong confront necessity. The weak create commandments to avoid it. Humanity's greatest disguise is its moral vocabulary. It turns trembling into compassion, envy into justice, cowardice into humility. Every sermon hides a confession, every saint a secret war against himself. Listen closely to the world. You will hear it. The tone of moral outrage is never the sound of purity. It is the shriek of repression, the echo of impotence dressed in righteousness. People do not condemn because they are good. They condemn because they are afraid. Cowardice wears many masks. It kneels at altars, writes manifestos, builds laws. But its essence is always the same: the refusal to face what one truly wants. The coward hides behind ought. He does not dare to say, I desire. He says, I must not. Quote, he fears not sin, but exposure, the unveiling of his own will, raw and hungry. Morality was invented by those who could not bear the sight of their own nature. They called their fear goodness. They called their resentment virtue, and the world applauded. The masses do not want truth. They want comfort wrapped in sanctity. They pray not to God, but to their own reflection, cleaned, sanctified, stripped of every animal impulse. They want to believe that their trembling obedience makes them holy. But morality is not holiness. It is anesthesia. It numbs the mind, silences the instincts, and paints serenity over paralysis. What the herd calls peace is merely the stillness of those too frightened to move. What is a good man? He is the one who obeys, who suppresses, who follows the rules written by other cowards before him. He does not harm others, not because he loves them, but because he fears the consequences of being free. His virtue is measured by how perfectly he restrains himself from living. The good man is society's favorite slave. He polices his own heart. He feels guilt for every impulse that dares to contradict the herd. He confuses repression with purity, conformity with character. When he does good, he waits for applause. When he resists temptation, he imagines himself noble. But in truth, he is terrified of judgment, of exile, of being seen without the mask. He does not live morally. He hides morally. Every should he utters is a wall he builds between himself and the raw, trembling pulse of life. The cruelest lies are those we tell ourselves to remain acceptable. Human beings create systems of virtue not to improve, but to justify their inability to act freely. They invent moral codes to escape the burden of individuality. For to live without morality is to stand naked before chaos, to look at the world without meaning, without divine order, without guarantees. Most men cannot endure that nakedness. They cover themselves with commandments, rituals, and moral costumes. They whisper, I am good, not because they are, but because they must believe it to survive. Their goodness is not the fruit of enlightenment, it is the camouflage of fear. They say, I help others, yet every act of help conceals a transaction. They seek gratitude to mask their emptiness, praise to validate their existence. Beneath every act of mercy lies a quiet hunger to feel important, to be loved, to control. Human virtue is not the opposite of sin. It is sin rebranded for social approval. The strong do not need morality. They do not consult commandments to know what must be done. Their compass is necessity, not approval. The strong man acts without explanation. He does not disguise his desire in moral language. He accepts that life is will-blind, striving, indifferent to ideals. He does not pretend to be pure. He strives to be real. But to the moral herd, such authenticity is terrifying. They call it arrogance, evil, selfishness. They cannot bear the sight of someone living without apology because it exposes the emptiness of their own obedience. The herd worships virtue because virtue hides their impotence. They fear those who do not fear, and so they invent sin, a word to chain the strong to the guilt of the weak. Look at them, the endless congregation of moralizers. eyes wide with indignation, voices trembling with collective certainty. They believe themselves righteous because they echo one another's lies. They mistake agreement for truth. They do not love virtue, they love belonging. They crave the warmth of conformity, the comfort of shared delusion. Their morality is not devotion, but tribal instinct. Listen to how they speak of the immoral, with trembling fury, with venom masked as virtue. They need an enemy, someone to project their forbidden desires upon. They call him sinner, heretic, deviant, evil. Every age finds its scapegoat. Every herd needs a sacrifice to feel pure. They crucify the living to protect the dead illusion of their moral order. And yet, in the secret chambers of their hearts, they envy the condemned. They envy his freedom. They envy the one who dares to act without seeking permission. Civilization, at its core, is a masquerade. Every moral code is a costume fitted to hide the will. From the pulpit to the parliament, from charity galas to digital crusades, the same theater unfolds. The performance of goodness. The modern man no longer kneels before the altar of religion, but he kneels all the same before public opinion, before image, before moral consensus. He fears exile more than sin. He worships acceptance more than truth. He has replaced the priest with the crowd. Confession is now performed online. Absolution comes in the form of likes, shares, applause. The morality of our time is no longer divine. It is social. But the mechanism is identical. The crowd rewards obedience, punishes deviation, and calls it ethics. The individual, desperate for belonging, mutilates himself to fit. The most dangerous people are not the wicked, but the righteous. For the wicked at least know they are human. The righteous believe they are gods. They destroy not out of hatred, but out of conviction. They burn, censor, crucify not because they doubt, but because they are certain. Their cruelty is sanctified by moral language. Their ignorance becomes holy through repetition. History is written in the ink of righteousness. Every genocide, every crusade, every social purge justified by virtue. The coward's hatred of freedom becomes a sacred duty when blessed by moral slogans. They speak of justice as if it were light, but their justice blinds more than it illuminates. They worship the law not because it is fair, but because it spares them the terror of thinking for themselves. Humanity will never be destroyed by evil. Evil is too honest, too direct. It declares its desire openly. What destroys humanity is cowardice dressed as virtue. The refusal to confront reality, hidden beneath moral performance. The endless repetition of slogans to silence the whisper of the soul. People fear not sin, but clarity. They fear the still moment when all their moral words dissolve and they see themselves as they are, driven, hungry, mortal, unredeemed. That sight would break them. And so they build temples of self-deception and call them civilizations. We are surrounded by cowards who hide behind morality. They kneel when they should stand. They preach when they should look inward. They condemn what they secretly crave. Their virtue is their disguise, and their disguise is their damnation. There is no salvation in pretending to be good, only in daring to see the truth, that beneath all appearances, life has no moral meaning. It simply is. The greatest liars are not those who deceive others. They are the ones who lie to themselves and call it conscience. Every moral man is, at heart, a hypocrite, not because he wishes to deceive the world, but because he cannot endure his own reflection. He builds mirrors that flatter him. He polishes them with words like justice, faith, and goodness. And he lives surrounded by these gleaming surfaces, mistaking their reflection for truth. Once upon a time, man feared the beast within him. He could feel it, that blind hunger that whispered, survive, dominate, take. So he chained it with myths. He invented gods to make himself bearable. Religion was born not from faith, but from terror. Terror of one's own instincts, of one's own will. And morality became the leash that tamed the animal. But a strange thing happened. The leash became a crown. What began as restraint turned into pride. Man began to worship his chains, boasting of how tightly he could pull them. He called himself civilized. He mistook his mutilation for moral growth. He confused self-denial with enlightenment. And thus, the great illusion began that the more one denies life, the holier one becomes. This is the tragedy of morality. It begins as protection from chaos and ends as worship of paralysis. The coward does not seek truth, he seeks permission. He prays to something above him, so he never has to stand on his own feet. He says, I obey God, when what he truly means is, I am too afraid to think for myself. He calls submission faith, hekos ignorance humility, and he believes that by kneeling low enough, he will be spared the burden of freedom. The coward's theology is built on fear of hell, fear of death, fear of one's own will. His piety is not devotion, it is avoidance. He believes that morality will shield him from the terror of existence. But all it does is dull his awareness, turn his fear into habit, his obedience into identity. The moral man performs miracles daily. He turns desire into virtue through denial, envy into righteousness through condemnation, and weakness into wisdom through inaction. Watch him closely. He does not destroy temptation. He buries it alive. He calls it self-control, but it is merely cowardice with better posture. He trembles at beauty, but calls it lust. He feels anger, but renames it justice. He craves recognition, but disguises it as altruism. He bleeds inside, but his mouth speaks of peace. His soul is a battlefield, not between good and evil, but between honesty and performance. Morality was never about truth. It was about safety. The herd needed a code to survive, a way to regulate instincts, to control the unpredictable. So it created virtue, a script to follow, a way to act without thinking, a way to appear harmless while remaining hungry. Virtue is armor, not light. It protects one from rejection, not from sin. Every kind act becomes a mask. Every moral statement becomes a shield. Behind every good person stands a trembling child begging, please don't exile me from the group. The herd does not love goodness, it loves obedience. It rewards the face that fits. It praises those who never make it uncomfortable. To live morally is to rehearse one's own absence, to disappear behind what others call acceptable. Guilt is the priest's masterpiece, a whip made of invisible fibers, woven through the flesh of conscience. The moral man cannot enjoy pleasure without apology. He cannot rest without shame. He cannot love without asking permission from a law written centuries ago by ghosts. He believes guilt is the voice of God. It is not. It is the echo of his captors in his mind. Every time he laughs too freely, they whisper, you should not. Every time he feels desire, they murmur, you are impure. So he divides himself, one half alive, the other half watching, judging, punishing. And society calls this schizophrenia maturity. From birth, we inherit the moral vocabulary of our ancestors, their fears, their prohibitions, their shame. Before a child learns to speak, he learns what is forbidden. Before he learns love, he learns guilt. And thus, the cycle continues. Generation after generation of trembling saints, raising trembling children to believe that life itself must be apologized for. The species has perfected the art of domestication. It does not use chains of iron, but chains of approval and shame. Every moral education is a ritual of castration, the cutting away of instinct, curiosity, individuality. And we call this becoming a good person. Quote, nothing in this world is more dangerous than the moral man with a cause. He believes his hatred holy, his cruelty necessary. He does not see blood, he sees redemption. He does not see victims, he sees purifiers. When he burns, he thinks he cleanses. When he destroys, he believes he saves. His conscience is tranquil, because his blindness is absolute. He is not evil, he is certain. And certainty is the most lethal drug known to man. The fanatic is not born, he is morally educated, taught from childhood to mistake obedience for virtue, and virtue for truth. When his faith matures, it blossoms into violence, done in the name of righteousness. Every moral age is obsessed with appearance. It must be because appearance is the only thing that keeps the illusion alive. People do not want to be good. They want to appear good. They do not seek purity. They seek witnesses. Morality thrives under surveillance. Without an audience, the moral man dissolves. He needs the eyes of others to confirm his goodness, like a ghost that exists only when seen. In solitude, morality dies. Only when alone do we meet our true selves, stripped of pretense, beyond judgment, beyond praise. That is why the crowd fears silence. That is why solitude is the last heresy. The more one hides behind morality, the more monstrous the hidden self becomes. The suppressed desire does not vanish. It rots, festers, mutates. The preacher becomes the pervert, the reformer becomes the tyrant, the saint becomes the sadist, because the will cannot be erased, only redirected. And repression is the most fertile soil for corruption. This is the secret the moral world will never confess, that the darker the preaching, the more diseased the preacher. They condemn loudly because their silence would betray them. What we call virtue is often the corpse of a murdered instinct, and what we call civilization is a cemetery of repressed desires. Hypocrisy is not an event. It is a slow, lifelong decomposition. It begins the day one pretends to be better than one is. It grows every time one chooses reputation over reality. And by the time one dies, the soul is already dust, suffocated under layers of self-justification. The tragedy of morality is not that it fails. It is that it succeeds too well. It makes men manageable, predictable, and empty. They no longer suffer from sin. They suffer from sterility. They are so virtuous, they can no longer feel. Look around you. You will see them everywhere. The polished faces of the righteous, the careful smiles, the eyes that never tell the truth. They speak of integrity, but their words are rehearsed. They speak of love, but their touch is cold. They speak of God, but worship their own reflection. This is the anatomy of hypocrisy. A body that kneels, a mouth that prays, and a heart that quietly rots beneath the altar. The illusion of virtue does not die in the individual alone. It blossoms into civilization. Every city, every creed, every institution is a cathedral built atop collective fear. The walls are made of commandments, the windows stained with obedience. The people call it progress, but it is only refinement in disguise, the perfection of restraint, the domestication of spirit. Civilization was not born from wisdom, but from exhaustion. It rose when man decided that the chaos within him must be buried beneath the comfort of order. The strong once lived by instinct, guided by necessity, by the raw pulse of survival. But the weak learned a subtler weapon, morality. They could not conquer through strength, so they conquered through guilt. They wrapped their envy in laws, their impotence in virtue, their fear in faith. And so the wild were tamed not by the sword, but by the sermon. This is how the moral machine was built, a mechanism that transforms individuality into obedience, will into submission, and truth into doctrine. You can hear it humming everywhere, in classrooms that teach conformity, in pulpits that preach surrender, in governments that sanctify mediocrity. It whispers the same command in 1,000 dialects. Do not think, do not dare, do not deviate. To live according to one's own will is the only unforgivable sin in the eyes of the herd. And so man becomes a part in a system too vast to question. He learns early that it is safer to agree than to understand. He memorizes moral slogans and calls it education. He repeats the language of virtue without knowing its meaning. His individuality is filed down until it fits perfectly within the machinery of culture, smooth, replaceable, obedient. The tragedy of civilization is that it mistakes tameness for peace. It believes that when the will is quieted, the soul is healed. But beneath the order, something trembles. The animal within man is not dead, only tranquilized. It dreams beneath the surface, pacing in silence, waiting for the moment when the bars of virtue grow thin. Look closely, and you will see it in the eyes of the office worker who smiles too much, in the lips of the preacher who condemns too loudly, in the rage that erupts from those who claim to love peace. The repressed will always return. It cannot be destroyed, only redirected. You will hear it. The tone of moral outrage is never the sound of purity. It is the shriek of repression, the echo of impotence dressed in righteousness. People do not condemn because they are good. They condemn because they are afraid. Cowardice wears many masks. It kneels at altars, writes manifestos, builds laws. But its essence is always the same: the refusal to face what one truly wants. The coward hides behind ought. He does not dare to say, I desire. He says, I must not. Every massacre is baptized in the name of the good. The blood dries faster when the executioner prays. Modern man thinks himself beyond this, yet he performs the same rituals with new names. He no longer confesses to priests, but to the crowd. His altar is the screen, his scripture the trending opinion. He offers his virtue for public consumption and calls it integrity. He condemns with hashtags and feels holy for a moment. The same disease persists, the addiction to appear good instead of being true. Virtue has become currency, traded in markets of reputation. The philanthropist advertises compassion while his hands tremble with greed. The activist chants justice, yet secretly hungers for domination. The influencer preaches selflessness for the sake of attention. Goodness has become a brand, morality a performance. The world no longer believes in God, yet it worships the audience. Underneath this pageantry lies the same hunger to be seen as righteous. Men used to die for heaven. Now they sell morality for visibility. The stage is crowded with saints who smile for the camera while the world decays behind them. No one wishes to face the raw truth, that the moral instinct, stripped of pretense, is nothing but vanity seeking validation. Every age invents its own method of sanctifying submission. Religion once promised paradise for obedience. Now society promises approval. The gods have changed their names, but the priests remain. They speak the new moral language of equality, sustainability, kindness, noble words, emptied of meaning by overuse. The crowd repeats them to avoid the silence that would reveal their emptiness. And so the cycle continues. Each generation praises its own virtue, condemns the sins of the past, and creates new prisons for the next. The form evolves. The essence remains the triumph of cowardice, disguised as compassion. The moral order survives because it flatters mediocrity. It tells every ordinary soul that restraint is nobility, that conformity is wisdom, that denial is grace. It forgives their fear and calls it goodness. But beneath all this decorum, life persists raw, immoral, unashamed. Nature knows no virtue. The lion does not apologize to the lamb. The ocean feels no guilt for the shipwreck. Civilization feeds on that suppression, recycling it into industry, ambition, moral outrage. What it calls productivity is merely sublimated despair. The myth of the greater good is the crown jewel of this machine. It convinces each cog that their obedience serves something higher. They believe they act for humanity, but humanity is only the mask that hides the will to control. No tyrant ever ruled without the blessing of moral justification. Every empire calls itself righteous. The sun burns equally upon saint and sinner. Existence moves without justification. It simply wills. Only man insists that his will must be forgiven before it can act. He builds moral systems to humanize what cannot be humanized. He imagines a universe that cares, that rewards and punishes, that sees him as special. But the stars are silent. The wind carries no commandments. The only voice that speaks is his own trembling. Afraid to admit that meaning is his invention. The philosopher who dares to question morality is not merely doubting rules, he is dismantling the architecture of collective fear. He is the heretic of modernity, the enemy of appearances. His clarity is dangerous because it reveals the fraud of virtue. He reminds the herd that beneath all their moral chatter, they are still animals pretending to be angels. And so the herd reacts as it always has with outrage, with persecution, with the desperate cry of the righteous. They call him immoral, godless, mad. They exile him, crucify him, cancel him, for nothing terrifies them more than the one who no longer believes in their moral theater. His freedom exposes their slavery, but there is a strange beauty in that exile. Beyond the walls of the moral machine lies a vast silence, the world as it is, stripped of illusion. The philosopher who steps into it finds not comfort, but clarity. He sees that life does not need his virtue to exist. He learns that meaning, when no longer dictated by the crowd, becomes intimate, personal, tragic, real. This is what civilization fears most. The individual who does not hide behind morality, the one who acts without apology, who speaks without permission, who loves without justification. He is uncontrollable. He cannot be recruited, converted, or shamed. He becomes a mirror too bright for the herd to endure. And yet, such a man is necessary. For without him, the species would drown in its own obedience. Every revolution, every work of genius, every act of true creation was born from the courage to betray the moral consensus. Progress does not come from the righteous. It comes from those who dare to be wrong in the eyes of the crowd. But this courage is rare. Most would rather drown in virtue than swim in freedom. They prefer the comfort of belonging to the loneliness of clarity. They surround themselves with the noise of moral certainty to avoid the silence of self-awareness. They would rather be good than alive. And so the moral machine continues, polishing its gears with new ideals, spinning endlessly, grinding the wildness out of man. He becomes efficient, polite, useful, and hollow. His conscience hums like a well-oiled engine, but his soul sleeps. Civilization calls this harmony. The philosopher calls it decay. Yet even decay can be beautiful when seen without illusion. The rot of morality feeds the soil of awakening. For when the pretense collapses, when the moral masks crumble, what remains is something ancient and indestructible, the will itself, naked and indifferent. It is neither good nor evil, it simply is. And in that terrible simplicity lies freedom. The herd will never understand this. They will continue to sing hymns to their own cowardice, to parade their righteousness before the abyss. But the one who sees through it walks quietly. He no longer argues, no longer condemns. He observes the play of virtue and vice with the same detached compassion one feels for children pretending to be kings. For he knows now what they cannot bear to admit, that beneath all their laws and loves, their gods and governments, their causes and crusades, there is only one force, blind and eternal, moving through everything. The will. It neither blesses nor blames. It hungers. It creates and destroys without reason. And morality is but a fragile curtain fluttering before its wind. The deeper one peers into this civilization of virtue, the more clearly one sees its true cost, the desolation of the human soul. For every moral law imposed upon the flesh, a wound opens beneath the skin. For every "thou shalt not," a fragment of vitality withers away. Humanity calls this progress. The philosopher calls it self-mutilation. Look closely at the moral man, the one who prides himself on being good. His face is composed, his voice tempered, his gestures polite. Yet behind his eyes burns a quiet misery, a hunger denied too long, a rage that cannot speak its name. He has mastered the art of smiling through suffocation. He lives not in the world, but in a reflection of what others call respectable. Every breath he takes must first pass through the filter of permission. The tragedy of the moral soul is that it can no longer feel without justification. Pleasure must be defended, desire must be excused, joy must be proven innocent before the tribunal of conscience. And so, the simplest sensations, hunger, curiosity, passion, are paraded through endless moral interrogation until they die from shame. What remains is a body alive by habit, not by will. A ghost with a heartbeat. When one represses the will long enough, it does not disappear, it turns inward. Desire denied becomes guilt. Guilt festers into resentment. Resentment decays into despair. The moral man, believing himself virtuous, carries within him a slow poison. He hates the sinner because he sees in him what he has buried. He condemns not evil, but his own reflection. His piety is vengeance disguised as virtue. The world calls this discipline. It builds temples to celebrate it. But to the philosopher, it is tragedy, the soul turned against itself. No prison is more absolute than the one constructed out of moral certainty. The prisoner not only believes in his chains, he calls them salvation. To live honestly within such a world is to become an exile. The one who speaks truth will always be condemned as immoral, for truth dismantles illusion, and illusion is the sacred foundation of society. The artist, the thinker, the solitary, these are the casualties of the moral order. They do not fit. Their authenticity exposes the collective lie. And for that, the crowd calls them dangerous. Watch how the herd responds to those who live without disguise. It surrounds them with suspicion, whispers about their arrogance, mocks their freedom. For the presence of a genuine being reminds every coward of his own surrender. The herd cannot forgive clarity. It feels like violence to their comfort. They prefer a hypocrite who mirrors their weakness to a free soul who reveals their bondage. Thus, honesty becomes the rarest of virtues. Not the honesty of speech, but the honesty of existence. To live without pretending to be better than one is to act without the disguise of righteousness, to love without apology. This is the most subversive act in a moral civilization. The crowd calls it immorality. The philosopher calls it truth. Yet, this truth is not pleasant. It strips away the illusions that make life bearable. When one ceases to hide behind moral narratives, the world grows unbearably silent. No divine justification, no collective applause, no assurance that good will triumph over evil. There is only life indifferent, tragic, magnificent. To see this clearly is to be alone among men. Solitude, then, is not a retreat. It is the natural consequence of awakening. The one who sees through illusion cannot remain among those who still worship it. He walks apart, not out of pride, but out of necessity. The noise of morality is too loud for truth to be heard. Only in solitude can one breathe without the stench of pretense. In this silence, a strange peace begins to unfold, not joy, not hope, but something colder, purer, clarity. One begins to see that suffering is not a punishment, but the texture of existence itself. The will hungers, collides, destroys, creates, and through this endless motion, life persists. There is no sin in this, no virtue, only necessity. The philosopher learns to look upon pain not with complaint, but with understanding. In the vast machinery of the world, suffering is simply the friction of being. This insight destroys all moral comfort. It reveals that there is no cosmic justice, no moral order balancing good and evil. The suffering of the innocent, the triumph of the corrupt, these are not exceptions, but the rule. The world is will, not wisdom. It moves blindly, propelled by desire, indifferent to the cries of conscience. To demand morality from existence is like asking fire not to burn. The moral man cannot bear this vision. He retreats into faith, into slogans, into the narcotic of righteousness. He insists that his pain has meaning, that his obedience will be rewarded, that someone watches, judges, redeems. But the philosopher who sees through illusion knows better. There is no watcher, no redeemer, only the self gazing into the infinite mirror of the world. And yet, in that mirror, something luminous flickers the realization that to accept reality as it is, without justification, is the beginning of freedom. Freedom is not joy, it is not comfort. It is lucidity, the courage to stand without the crutches of morality, to endure the naked truth of being. It is to stop saying, "This should not be," and instead whisper, "This is." From that acceptance arises a strange kind of dignity, not the pride of virtue, but the serenity of understanding. The herd cannot comprehend this serenity. They mistake it for nihilism, for despair. But it is neither. It is sobriety, the end of illusion. The philosopher no longer chases salvation or progress. He walks calmly through the ruins of moral dreams, collecting fragments of truth. He no longer condemns the world, for condemnation is just another form of attachment. He observes, and in observing, he transcends. He watches the righteous rage, the hypocrites preach, the cowards kneel, and he feels no hatred, only pity, and even pity fades. For he knows that every being is driven by the same will, caught in the same endless cycle of craving and pain. The difference is only in awareness. The herd suffers blindly, the philosopher suffers consciously. Awareness does not cure pain, it sanctifies it. When one accepts this, solitude ceases to feel like punishment. It becomes a temple. In its quietness, the noise of morality dies, and something eternal is heard beneath it. Not a voice, but a vibration, the pulse of being itself. There, one realizes that the pursuit of goodness was never the goal. The only noble task is to see. To see clearly, that is all. To see the hypocrisy, the self-deception, the cruelty of false virtue, and still remain gentle, still remain silent. For truth needs no defense. It stands, unarmed and invincible, amid the ruins of moral empires. The philosopher does not seek to change men. He understands that they will always prefer the comfort of illusion. He does not wish to save them, for salvation is another illusion. He only wishes to remain awake while the rest dream. And in that wakefulness, he discovers something sacred, though it wears no halo. The stillness beyond judgment. It is not happiness, for happiness belongs to those who still hope. It is not peace, for peace implies an end. It is the clarity of knowing that nothing needs to be forgiven, nothing needs to be condemned. The world is neither good nor evil. It simply is, and that is enough. The philosopher walks through the city at dusk, watching the lights flicker on each window, a small confession of loneliness. The crowd moves with mechanical grace, smiling, nodding, moralizing, pretending. He no longer despises them. He sees their cowardice for what it is, the instinct to survive. And survival, too, is the will's expression. Even deception is a form of life's persistence. He does not judge, but he does not return. The solitude he carries is not exile, but freedom. For to live without illusion is to stand outside the crowd's noise, to breathe where others suffocate. In this desolation, he finds not despair, but an austere beauty, the beauty of truth stripped bare. And as he continues, the voices of the moral world fade behind him, their hymns, their outrage, their righteousness dissolving into distance. He walks alone, but not lost. The night welcomes him, vast and indifferent. The stars look down without judgment, And for the first time, he feels something that resembles peace, not the peace of comfort, but the peace of clarity. He has accepted the cost of seeing. He has learned that the only true immorality is self-deception. And the only true virtue, if one dare still use the word, is the courage to face existence without disguise.